Hi, I'm Ryan, and you are watching my YouTube series on functional programming. In this episode, I'm going to talk about pure functions. It's something that we use a lot in functional programming, and you may or may not have come across it. So, we will briefly go through it. So, by definition, a pure function is a function whose output value only depends on the input value and does not have any observable side effects. So, what kind of side effects, you may ask? So, the function does not modify any variables outside of its scope, and the function does not modify its input. So these two are considered as side effects. So let's see a very simple example of pure function. So we have this function here times 10, and it accepts an input and multiplies it by 10. So does it have any side effects? I would say not, because all it does is multiplies it by 10. It does not access the environment. Everything that it uses is inside of its scope, like the value 10, like the value x, right? And does it modify its input? Clearly not. It just returns a new value from the input. So basically, a pure function takes a set of input values and produces a corresponding set of output values. The values in the output set may or may not be null, that's completely valid, but it always produces the same set of output for the same set of inputs. So now let's see some examples of pure and impure functions. So we have this function here, sumj, which adds I and j. But notice that the value of I is declared outside of the scope of the sum function. So in this case, an external program can come and execute or modify the value of I. And in that case, when you run the sumj function, the output set of values can be different because it accesses a global. So this makes it an impure function. Now let's look at a pure sum function. It takes two values and returns an output, just depending on those two values. This is pure because it does not have any side effects and it does not depend on a global or on the environment. So let's look at this one. We have an append function which takes an array and a value, and it pushes the value onto the array and returns the array. This is impure because it modifies the input. The calling program sends an array as a reference. So even if it was an object, it would be passed by reference. And if the function changes the object, or the function appends a value to the array, or manipulates the array in any other way, it is not a pure function. So the same operation can be performed using the concat operator, where you return a new array instead of modifying the original array, and that makes it a pure function. Now let's look at another function here, which is the greet. And all I'm doing here is I'm logging the message to the console, which is an IO. So I'm accessing the environment, I'm having a side effect in the form of an IO, and I'm returning a value. So that's the fact that I'm making an IO over here makes it an impure function. So instead, what I could do is I could simply say greet, and I could return the value of the concatenation. This makes it a pure function. There's no access to the environment. It only relies on variables inside of its scope. And that's what those are all the examples I had for a pure function. And pure functions are used a lot in functional programming. It is actually the functions that we use to pass to the map function on our containers. So you're going to see them being used a lot. Pure functions are really nice because they let you, they are very easy to test actually, because they have no dependencies. You can just test them directly. And you can always have a predictable set of output for an input. So you don't change the environment, there's nothing to worry about. Their dependencies are within scope. So that's about it for pure functions, and I hope you find it useful. And stay tuned for some more interesting stuff on functional programming.